I am filing this report under my own designation, because no one else on the sub-level 4 staff is willing to put their name to it. That tells you something about how the shift ended. The human arrived at 0340 Facility Standard. Transfer manifest listed her as Prisoner 7 Veth, captured during the Delavar sweep, flagged for tribunal at 0900. Standard intake. I have processed 412 intake bookings over my tenure at the Kethavar Secure Processing Annex. I note this because I want it on record that what happened during this intake was not the result of error, inexperience, or equipment failure. It was the result of a species we did not understand at the level we believed we did. Pre-tribunal sedation is routine. The annex uses vethkaline compound for all organic detainees, a paralytic adjacent agent calibrated to induce docility and motor suppression without full unconsciousness. The dosing is tiered by body mass. We are careful. We have never had a containment incident with vethkaline in 11 years of operation. I administered the first dose at 0347. The human, she gave her name as Rael, offered it without being asked, in the same tone one gives a meal order, sat in the processing chair, and watched the injector with what I can only describe as professional curiosity. She was not afraid. She was not performing calm. She was simply not concerned. I have processed Dravathi smugglers, Kelorn dissidents, a Gaunt-class Marath bounty skip who had survived a hull breach barehanded. None of them looked like Rael looked. They were afraid and suppressing it. She was not suppressing anything. The first dose did nothing visible within the standard 2-minute window. I noted it in the log as a possible calibration error and administered a second dose at the upper threshold for her recorded body mass. Vethkaline at that concentration will floor a Dravathi twice her weight in under 90 seconds. Rael blinked twice, rolled her shoulders slowly, and said she felt a slight warmth in her left arm. She asked if that was expected. I told her to remain still. She remained still. She also remained entirely awake. I called medical technician Sova at 0401. Sova reviewed the injector unit, confirmed calibration, and administered a third dose. Clinical override authority, one step above the upper threshold. I have never seen Sova administer a clinical override. He is methodical to the point of rigidity and does not deviate from protocol casually. Rael said the warmth had spread to her shoulder. She seemed genuinely interested in reporting this accurately. She asked if we were trying to sedate her, and when Sova said yes, she nodded thoughtfully and said she had wondered. She did not resist. She offered her arm for the fourth dose herself, tilting it slightly to make the vein more accessible. Sova later told me that was the moment he began to feel something he could not name. Dose 4, Dose 5. At Dose 5 we were operating at concentrations that, according to the reference manual Sova pulled, would induce cardiac suppression in most warm-blooded species within 4 minutes of administration. Rael's pulse, on the monitor cuff we had attached by Dose 3, read 58. Slow and steady. She asked if we had anything she could read while we worked. I want to pause on that number. 58. A resting cardiac rate. No elevation from stress. No suppression from the compound. No measurable deviation from whatever her baseline was. Sova had been recording the readings at 1-minute intervals. He showed me the graph later. It was a flat line with the small natural variation of a body at rest. Not a body under chemical assault. Not a body fighting anything. A body that had, as far as its own internal systems were concerned, noticed nothing worth noting. We did not. Dose 6 was administered by Sova, with his hands visibly unsteady. He is not a man prone to unsteady hands. I am putting this in the report because I believe it matters. We were not panicking. We were doing something more unsettling than panicking. We were continuing methodically through a protocol that had ceased to make sense, because the protocol was all we had. At Dose 7, I contacted the on-call physician, Medic Ovren, who arrived at 0429, reviewed Sova's notes in silence, looked at Rael, looked at the monitor, looked at Sova, and then looked at me, with an expression I do not have a word for in the official incident report vocabulary. It was the expression of someone recalculating something they had believed settled. Ovren took the chemical reference file and cross-indexed the human metabolic data we had on file. What we had on file was sparse. The annex's species library lists 62 biochemical profiles for common detainee populations. Humans occupy entry 41. The entry is 3 paragraphs. Overin read all 3 paragraphs twice and then said, quietly, to no one in particular, that the file did not include sedative response calibration data. Rael heard him. She said she was not surprised. We asked her what she meant. She thought about it for a moment, genuinely, as though deciding how technical to be, and then she said that human tolerance to chemical agents was high, that humans had spent a long time introducing substances to their bodies recreationally, medicinally, and accidentally, and that their biology had developed in ways that made foreign compounds difficult to stick. She said she was not immune. She said the warmth was real. She said she was fairly certain she would feel something at some point. She said this the way a person describes the weather, factually, without drama, without pride. Dose 8. Dose 9. At dose 9, Overin stepped away from the room entirely, for approximately 4 minutes. I do not know what he did during those 4 minutes. He returned looking composed. Dose 10 was administered at 0451. Rael's pulse was 61. Her eyes were clear. She had been in the chair for over an hour at that point, and had not shifted her posture in any way that suggested distress. She asked, at some point around dose 10, I have the exact time in the raw log, whether we had considered simply not sedating her. She said she understood the protocol. She said she was not going to run. She said it plainly, without sarcasm, and I believed her, which troubled me more than the failed doses had. We administered dose 11 because Overin said the tribunal would not accept an unsedated detainee, and because none of us had an alternative framework yet for what we were dealing with. Dose 11 did what none of the others had done. Rael's eyelids went slightly heavy. Her head tilted a few degrees to the left, she said, with the specificity of someone reporting a minor symptom to a physician, that she felt a little fuzzy. She also said she was still fine. The monitor confirmed it. Her pulse was 64. We did not administer dose 12. I want to be clear about that. The documentation says 12 doses, because the medical log from Overin's report counted the preparation of dose 12 as administered in the broader sense of the incident cycle. We drew it. We did not inject it. Overin looked at the syringe, looked at the monitor, and said we had reached the outer boundary of what the chemistry would do, because at that concentration, we were no longer sedating. We were testing a hypothesis about whether the human body had a ceiling, and we were not equipped to answer that question in a processing annex. He postponed the tribunal himself, filed it under medical grounds. It was the correct call. Rael was transferred to a standard holding room at 0512, unsedated, and asked, again, without drama, whether there was somewhere she could sleep. She said it had been a long night. A guard showed her to the bunk. When the shift supervisor checked at 0600, she was asleep, on her own terms, in her own time. The tribunal was rescheduled for 3 days out to allow the medical office time to generate a proper sedative response protocol for human detainees. I understand that protocol is still being written. I understand there are 15 researchers assigned to it. I understand the early data suggests the ceiling we failed to find that night is not a ceiling in any sense that means what we thought it meant. I do not have commentary on that. I am a detention officer. I process intakes. What I have is this. I watched 12 calibrated doses of vethkaline fail to suppress a human who cooperated fully, sat still the entire time, and at one point helped us locate a better vein. She was not defiant. She was not enhanced. She was, by every behavioral measure, the least problematic detainee I processed that year. Her biology simply did not agree with our chemistry, not as an act of resistance, not as a feature of training or augmentation, as a fact of what she was. I have filed this report accurately. I have not filed it comfortably. There is a difference, and I think that difference is worth noting.